Hey, hello, and welcome to another episode of someone else that Mike Barron has blackmail material on.
Indeed. Oh, we have some blackmail material on each other.
I was gonna say that might go both ways.
Oh yeah, absolutely right. Thank you guys for inviting me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, Dean and I worked together on Hawk and Dove for DC, and Dean's been a master illustrator for many years, and he's gone independent in the last couple of years through his own Silverline comics. But Dean, let's get into the beginning. How did you break into comics?
Well, at the time, I was working in advertising in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was working for a small creative department for a huge department store named Macy's, and they had a store there at the time, and we were being low man on the totem pole there, just hired. I was one of the crew asked to do inventory, and back in those days, that meant staying up till midnight and counting merch, right? So we're in the downtown area mall there. I think it was in Buckhead, and we're counting inventory for Macy's. And I walk by a Walden Books, I think it was, and I see one of those turnstiles, a spinner rack, and I see a comic book cover, and it was just not that great. You know, the drawing wasn't that great. So, you know, this little voice, it's like, I can do better than that. And then I heard another voice say, "Why don't you prove it then?" So from that point on, I sort of went, I've got to prove that I can draw better than some of these guys getting hired to draw comics. So there was a resource book at the time called The Artist's Market. I don't know if you remember that, but it was sort of a guidebook on how to promote your art, how to get work commercially, whether it was fine art or commercial. I mean, I was an illustrator at the time, just getting work wherever I could. So I started submitting. And, you know, I got the typical rejection letters. You need to work on this. You need to work on that. So time passed, and I'm in a copy store, and I'm making copies to submit. And a gentleman by the name of Roland Mann walks into the copier store. And I don't believe this was by accident by any means. He looks over and he says, "Hey, did you draw those pages?" "Yeah." "Well, what are you going to use them for?" "I'm submitting. I'm trying to get work." "Where are you sending them to?" "Marvel, DC, you know, the usual." And he goes, "Well, I actually just got hired by a small company out in Malibu as an editor." I said, "You're kidding." No. He said, "Can I take these with?" I'm like, "Sure, here, take a couple of stacks of these things." So anyway, long story short, too late. He gave me the opportunity to draw my first full color superhero comic called The Ferret way back in the early 90s. I think it was 93. And it has the unique quality of having the very first die cut cover for Ferret #1. And it just started from there. That led to me getting other work. You know, going to shows helped, of course, going to San Diego and networking. Those days was a lot different. It really was, you know, it was who you knew and who liked you and who you talked to and all of that. So that's how it started in the early 90s.
And Roland, if you're listening to this, he wants to do another die cut cover really badly.
You know, we just get a cookie cutter and sharpen the edges, and we'll use that.
Nice sharp X-Acto will take care of that. Another foil cover, perhaps an embossed cover. I joke with them all the time. I want to do a spot varnish embossed, you know, foil. Anyway, so we've reconnected. You know, fast forward from those madcap days in the 90s, and about 6 years ago, we reconnected via, I think it was Facebook, and I said, you know, "What are you doing?" And he talked about, you know, well, I looked into getting some work for one of the big two again, but it just wasn't going to work out. They wanted me to move out to Burbank, and they weren't paying me, you know, anything. And I said, "Well, are you going to start back up?" He said, "I'm thinking about it." And I said, "Well, what are you thinking about?" And we talked about Silverline, which is a small publishing venture he had started in the late 80s. And he had a book called Cat and Mouse. we talked about it. We came up with the idea of me drawing issue number 1, and one thing led to another, and he decided, well, let me start this up again. So it's been going for about 6 years. We got about 30 titles. There's a lot of folks there from the Malibu days, and a lot of veterans there from from the 90s who are still working, and some new folks too that Roland taught in school. He's actually teaching sequential art as well as writing some of the comics. So that led me to get back into the industry. Keep getting pulled back in, like Pacino. But it's fun. I never really stopped doing it. It was one of those things where I had to get a regular paycheck and things like insurance and maybe some retirement. So it was like I had to get what you'd call a real day job in the early 2000s, and I've stuck with that for almost 20 years now. Working for FedEx by day, comics by night. I actually draw airplane parts for them, for their pilot school. So that's kind of the day gig, and then still do this when I can, nights and weekends, much to my wife's chagrin. And are you still drawing? Yes, I'm done yet. So, but no, she's very supportive. I joke around. But yeah, so I'm still doing this stuff. And like Mike said, he and I worked on Hawk and Dove back in the 90s. And then we actually pitched some stuff to Marvel. You remember that about 10 years ago, Mike? We pitched some stuff to Marvel and DC. And this was the beginning of them sort of going, you guys are too old. We don't, nah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We weren't cool anymore. So like, okay, we'll just take our stuff and do our own stuff, which, nowadays with the internet as your distribution, so on and so forth, it's more viable to go that route, and actually cooler because we're the gatekeepers in a way. We go directly to the audience now. So, it's no longer, some editor who decides whether you're going to get work or not. It's more, do your own thing and the audience decides. So.
Yeah. So speaking of Marvel, and I know this is backtracking a little bit.
Yeah.
Were you there when Marvel bought Malibu? I'm wondering what that was like.
That was a lot of politics and a lot of gossip and a lot of turbulence.
Yeah.
The long story short was both DC and Marvel were interested in Malibu.
That's right.
They were both negotiating, behind the scenes, and all the suits were having their talks and, flexing their muscles and so on. And the way Roland tells it, he was actually privy to a lot of these backroom conversations. I get it secondhand, but he said basically that Marvel bought Malibu basically as a color house,
right? Yeah,
to prevent DC from buying it. So it was an ego thing. Oh no, you're not going to. We're going to get it, right? So the assumption was, oh, cool. We'll be crossing over. It'll be like Ferret and Wolverine, or Nightman and Prime, man. Oh, it's cool. No, never happened. So lawyers got involved and mayhem ensued, and so I don't think you're ever going to see Marvel with Malibu characters, which is kind of sad.
They never did anything with those characters, did they?
No, they didn't. Yeah. It had to do with the ownership of a gentleman who should remain nameless at this point, that would really charge a whole lot of money if that was to happen. And they were like, we'll just make up new stuff. So
they've been kind of doing that with the cross-gen stuff too that they bought up.
Yep.
I mean, it's what the big corporations do.
Yeah, and it's, you guys could talk more about, how corporate has just altered the landscape forever in terms of that. But I think there's just so much more freedom now to do what we want to do than there was. I mean, I was like any other guy trying to break in. I was, oh man, it would be so cool to draw Batman. So I did.
Right.
And, oh, it's so cool to draw, Green Lantern. I did. It was so cool to draw Wonder Woman. I did. And it's like, okay, but ultimately, you're still playing in someone else's sandbox, right? It would still be cool to draw Nexus, but that's
Yeah.
a conversation.
Well, we can talk about that, Dean.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that. But yeah, so now here we are, and I mean the fact that I can write and own my own character and have the excitement there, and also a lot of the generation that was brought up aspiring to draw these legacy classic characters, they've grown out of it, and the new up and coming readership is kind of like, yeah, they're cool. What else you got?
Yeah.
It doesn't really have that imprimatur of like you've made it as it did, back in the day. It still earns you a level of street cred, so to speak, to have done those legacy characters. But in the end, that's all it is. It's just like, hey, I used to play for the Cowboys. Okay, what are you doing now? So,
yeah.
It is what it is.
How do you feel about like kind of like anagram characters or whatever, where you kind of loosely base it on that, but you're like, I want to put my own spin on it?
I mean, I'm not going to diss people who want to do that, but hey, it's a wide open field. Do something completely out of left field. I mean, Mike is the master of that.
Yeah.
The variants of characters that Mike came up with for those rollicking Nexus adventures where you were just like, what? But that was the fun of it. You had no idea of the alien you were going to meet and the settings, the environments, where the twists and turns would take you. There's something compelling about that. That's just beyond the, okay, I'm going to make up another version of Batman. I'm going to make up another version of Spider-Man. And that's cool. I mean, if that's really what you want to do, but man, you've just got this whole world to go, do something really cool. The other, I'm asked, I should say, from artists a lot, do you draw like this guy or that guy? I want to draw like this, I want to draw like that. A lot of young people are starting out copying anime,
Yeah.
And I tell them, look, I start out copying my heroes. You start out copying but draw from life, learn from what you're drawing from. But in the end, draw like who you are and make it you, because that's what people are going to connect with. It's got to be genuine, whether you're writing or drawing. You got to feel that genuine connection with what you're doing. I remember showing my portfolio to Neil Adams, and boy, was that like a tough football coach, right? And I was talking about style, and he goes, you still got a lot of work to do before, you worry about losing your style. He's like, you gotta practice more. He's like, use photography, use reference, this and that. I mean, he just ripped it up. So I went back home and I went to the drawing board, and I had photographs of everything taped up, on the drawing board. And, after about a year, I could see the work was improving. And I tell young artists, draw from life, draw from photographs, draw from reference. Don't worry about a style right now, when you're starting out. Draw from reference, and your spin on that will come through, especially when you're not intentionally trying to do it. Mike understands this too. In the martial arts, when you're performing a kata, it's not really that you're performing a kata if you're doing it right. The kata is performing you. You're just a vehicle for that energy that's happening. And in an ideal place, when you're drawing, it's the same thing. You're not even thinking, I got to put a line here, I got to put a line here. It's not a mechanical thing. At least it's not for me. I just have to zone out, and it comes to life, And, it's not going to be perfectly what I see in my head, but pretty close. I'm seeing it here first. I'm not really constructing and recording. Not every artist works that way.
Do Do you have any advice for artists that are trying to get used to drawing like facial expressions and things like that?
Yeah, use a mirror. I used to have a mirror right by my table, and make the face and draw it.
Yeah.
Again, go from draw from life, reference it, vary your page. I would say also, like, medium shots, close-ups, faraway shots. Have those. Have a variation of those on every page if you can. And if you're going to do a close-up, take the time to structure the face. If it's going to be a grimace, you do it right. If it's going to be a smile, if it's going to be a frown, and pay attention to eyes. Hands and eyes can tell so much.
Bern Hogarth wrote a whole book about hands. Just hands.
Just hands. Gestures. There's a level of theatrical gesturing that goes on in comic books that really helps not only communicate whatever the emotions are that you're trying to get across, but also it can lead you to the next panel. One of my favorite things to do was give the characters, when they're in their street clothes and it's not a spandex fight scene or something like that, I like giving my characters business to do, right? So they're pouring themselves a glass of wine, or they're smoking, or they're smoking. I know it's not politically correct. Gosh, right? I mean, Wolverine should be smoking. I mean, come on.
We love cigarettes in the comics and the movies because they're so visual. You may not be able to smoke in real life, but by God, you can smoke in the movies and in comics.
So good. I mean, just using the smoke trails,
the smoke,
the hand gestures. A slight gesture this way, or this way, or what. I mean, there's so much acting involved with the characters and blocking that helps.
Yeah.
It's tremendous to have. But anyway, smoking, having a sip of wine or a beverage, anything. But also, preparing food. Like a kitchen is a great place for the characters to have a conversation off the fighting arena. Where what's going to happen. Did they find any evidence at the crime scene? I don't know. And the guys, chopping up the meat or whatever. And so, give the characters something to do in the background. There's nothing worse than, having them just standing upright and just delivering lines. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It also gives the artist that really nice camera setup. You can do over the shoulder. You can do, side view. So, you got to think of it cinematically to really make it come to life for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell a lot of writers, especially if they're doing a lot of that where the characters are just sitting there or standing there talking. I'll be like, have them walk and talk, have them do something or go somewhere, or like you said, drinking, like whatever, like, because it just adds energy and life to it.
Of course, I mean everybody's gonna eat or snack, or in the back in the day, smoke a cigarette, have a drink, that makes for a lot more interesting scene. And the fight scenes as well, give them something. There's nothing worse than there's convention in some script writers now where they'll, for the big two especially, they're so absorbed with dialogue. And I'm not against dialogue. Dialogue's everything.
Yeah.
But the fights will literally be dialogue splattered around a feature shot of like Spider-Man in a pose, right?
Right.
And you'll just see a couple of shots, maybe little bitty silhouettes of the fight scene, and then it's over, and then we're back to talking. It's like, no. This is action adventure superhero stuff. It's like, have the fight do something. Have it be in an interesting place. Have it take you from one room to the next. One of my favorite.
And show real techniques that are innovative and exciting, because you can use a fight scene to characterize your characters.
Absolutely. One of my favorite. I'll use a cinematic example. The John Wick fight scene. Where where he's followed the Russian gangsters, you know, into their club, and he's making his way toward the main gangster. He's going, and he's just using everything in the environment, you know, and he's actually running out of ammo in his clips, you know, and he's throwing it down. He's grabbing the bad guy's gun. He's shooting. I mean, and again, it shows not only the jujitsu that he's using, because he'll tie somebody up and flip them and armbar them on the ground, and then shoot another oncoming guy and another oncoming guy, and then take the guy out that he's got held down. You know, it's the practical nature of the action scene taking you somewhere. And I remember laying out a scene that Mike and I worked on for a pitch we did, and it was a Ronda Rousey move that was you know, like a scissor lock with the legs and takedown and an arm bar. And it was so much fun to draw the characters doing that rather than just, you know, old-fashioned fisticuffs. You know, I always like using throws too. Like if a character is in a fight scene, I love having the bad guy inverted, right? So the feet are in the air. So you're implying like a jujitsu throw or something, or an aikido throw. You know, I love seeing that. You know, show some techniques. And then the other thing I like to do, and this is one reason Mike and I worked well together, was I like drawing martial arts superhero characters, because you can really get into the details of stances and poses and kicks and punches, and you can even draw them practicing kata, which is really, really cool. I love seeing that in comics. I've seen it with I guess it was an Iron Fist sequence where he was just kind of zoned out and going through kata, you know, and in that place. And again, it reminds you, okay, I'm in that world, you know, and it's helpful to add atmosphere. And while I'm on atmosphere, the other thing I love to do, and I got this mainly from Ridley Scott, but he loves using textures in his scenes, everything from Blade Runner and Alien and Kingdom of Heaven, where everything's just stuff floating in the air. So I'm always using rain or ashes or smoke or sleet or debris, you know, or glass or fragments of something floating in the air. I love that because it just adds a level of texture to the drawing that gives it more interest, and it gives it motion. And so that's something I also use as well. And the other thing is lighting, which Ridley Scott is a master of lighting as well. Because if you go back and watch Alien, the very first one, it's not a huge budget, but it's all smoke and fog and lights and sirens and you know, he just masterfully told this story, and you're like, I'm literally just looking at, you know, the actress running through the same hallway with different smoke and lighting, and it's you know, it's the cinematography, but it's her acting, it's everything together. But I just remember a close up and seeing, you know, sweat beads on her face and her hands as she's watching for the alien, and you've got a strobe light going, and you've got fog machine rolling in the back. You know, I mean, I try to capture that too. So,
you know, you mentioned Ridley Scott, who's one of my favorite directors too. But occasionally he does something peculiar and questionable. And I thought that the fight scenes in Gladiator were unusually truncated and difficult to follow. But then you watch Kingdom of Heaven, which I consider one of his best movies, and it's exactly the opposite, because so much of Kingdom of Heaven is about tactics, how they're going to defend the city. They shoot the arrows to see how far they can go. Then they run out into the ground and plant flags where they are, so they know where they are. And then the giant siege machines, how they take down the siege machines. It's all brilliant. I love movies about tactics, and that one is just so great. And I wonder what happened to Gladiator. I just wonder why those scenes were so truncated. They didn't need to be.
They didn't need to be. And I wonder whether it was the stunt coordinator or how it was shot. I think, wasn't that the period of time when directors were using that sort of sped up use of, they were accelerating.
Yeah,
I'd have to look. I have the film.
Yeah,
probably.
and so they would speed up the action, and then I was like, come on, guys, just show us how the gladiators would fight. A net or a trident, or
The
I remember
fights are
that.
better in Spartacus.
Yeah, I love that. I love that film as well. But Gladiator is one of my favorites for the spectacle. But you're right, as far as just the visceral fight sequences and the strategy of it, I really enjoyed Kingdom of Heaven. And I think as far as shootouts mixed with martial arts, I think Chad Stahelski has done a tremendous job with John Wick, but also with Captain America 2, The Winter Soldier. I thought the action in that particular movie was excellent.
I think that's Marvel's best movie.
I would agree with you. I thought that the first Iron Man achieved a tonal balance of humor and action that was so enjoyable, mainly because RDJ did a decent job making that character more likable. And I thought Favreau did a nice job with that. But those two stand out for me, Iron Man 1 and Cap 2. Cap 2 probably edges it out just because of the action and the fact that I felt like they got Captain America right in that movie. Because I've discussed this before on a stream, but it's difficult for writers today to capture what I call Boy Scout characters, Superman and Captain America being the two come to mind. They seem to either darken them too much or they mock them through the dialogue of other characters. And that's a shame, because the iconic nature of Superman, for example, I've always considered his primary superpower to be his ability to restrain himself and not just rule, because it's that virtue of humility, right? That, I'm basically a godlike being. I could just tell these poor fools what to do and just punish them if they didn't, right? But instead, he's a public servant, right? And he is the Boy Scout that tries to do the right thing. There's not enough of that. People have this sense of outdatedness with virtue, and I think it's the opposite. We've never needed it more than now, in my opinion. And you can write characters that are Boy Scouts, and you can write them well. And I think that's an example. Cap 2 is an example of that. His dialogue and his behavior in that film show you everything you need to know about, hey, there was a time when, those virtues were admired. And if you write them well, they can be admired again. We've had plenty of anti-heroes. I was a teenager. I liked all the anti-heroes too. I liked, The Man with No Name and, Escape from New York and all that. I loved all that stuff, but I really was drawn to, if you had a Boy Scout character and he was well written, the Cowboys, for example, Gunsmoke. You're probably too young for that, Jeff, but Mike and I remember.
I remember Gunsmoke.
Do you remember Gunsmoke? Right?
Yeah.
So the idea, right, of having, High Noon, the character, the guy who has been there, he's seen it, he's done it, and he knows that at some point you just got to take the bad guys out, right? And he's not necessarily taking a lot of pleasure in that, but he's doing what's necessary. I was really disappointed, for example. I'll use a current example. Everybody loves Yellowstone, right?
Yeah.
And I like parts of what Taylor Sheridan is doing there in terms of showing the cowboy lifestyle, and in terms of their respect for, property rights and land and living in a style that's close to the land and so on. But I was really excited before the show actually was released because I thought it was going to be more like Gunsmoke. When I saw that Kevin Costner was cast, I was like, oh, dude, this is going to be awesome. He's going to be like the lone, Gary Cooper cleaning up a corrupt town and, that whole thing. There's a little bit of that, but I mean, he's just basically a gangster. I mean, it's his family of gangsters versus another set of bad guys. And so, it's bad guys versus bad guys, which, to each his own, you can do that too and make it good. But I was so hoping we'd have, the old fashioned, Elliot Ness in the Untouchables kind of thing. That's fun to me,
Yeah, I wonder, did you see that they I saw an ad, and I don't know where or when it's going to be, but there's some kind of like documentary series or something he's doing on Yellowstone and
yes.
the original. I in some ways I think that might give us more of what you're talking about.
Yeah, well,
hopefully
his fame is really that Gary Cooper-esque character that they see him as. And even though he's been written more as a, the head of a gang family who's going to do whatever they need to do to accomplish their goals.
Right.
People like it because of his past roles, it's arguably Dances with Wolves, Untouchable, Bodyguard.
I have to mention a film he made very recently that very few people have seen. It's called Let Him Go, and it co-stars Diane Lane, and it's a masterpiece. It's a thriller set in the 60s, and I can't recommend it too highly.
That sounds great. Is it on one of the streaming platforms?
Yes,
I took it out of the library.
Okay.
But you can find it on a streaming platform. Costner and Lane are two ranchers in Montana whose son marries a young woman. They have a boy, and then the son is killed in a horse accident, and the woman remarries into this family of scumbags. And one day they're in town, and they see her new husband first push the little boy who's 5 years old, and then he pushes the mother, and they realize they have to get him back. And it's about how they go to this family's place way off the grid in North Dakota and get him back.
Oh, it sounds great.
Also, both you guys have seen Treasure of the Sierra Madre, right?
Of course.
Well, there's a fight scene in there, which is the opposite of every fight scene we've ever discussed, but it's also probably the most realistic fight scene in a fictional movie that's ever been done. It's the fight in the bar when they're trying to collect their wages from the guy who hired them. You remember that?
Yeah.
And he hits them in the head with the bottle, and they end up rolling on the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way it is.
That's the way it is. Yeah. And also the fatigue level, after a few punches and rolling around the ground, the fighters start getting tired, so things get sloppy, and that's normal. That's real. That's real. And I remember that. And I recall in an interview before Spielberg completely lost his mind, where he was asked about Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he said that he wanted the character of Indiana Jones to be reminiscent of that character in Treasure of the Sierra Madre. So, and in that first film, in Raiders, the introduction of Indiana Jones has a little bit of that flavor to it. You don't know who it is, and he steps into the light after whipping the pistol out of the guy's hand who's trying to get the jump on him. Is very, very cool. But I like that tone for a hero too. I think Indiana Jones fits into what I'm talking about, where he does what's necessary, but I would say he's a Boy Scout as well. In I guess alignment, if we're going to use RPG language here. Right? What's your alignment? Lawful good, lawful neutral, chaotic good, whatever.
Well, speaking of that, you are involved with a role-playing game right now.
I am indeed. I was contacted about illustrating a guidebook for an upcoming role-playing game called Light Raiders, which is going to launch in the late spring of 23. And it's a faith-based game written by a gentleman named James Hannibal, who's written a lot of faith-based fiction material. You can check it out online. It's a lot of fun because it took me back to the days of being a kid and playing, D&D when it first came out, staying up all night and throwing dice and, making up silly adventures and having a good time. But it's, I got to design a lot of the characters and the environments, and it's fun, getting to draw high fantasy like that. It's a blast. So.
Yeah, and it's a hot thing right now too. I mean, not just role playing games, but fantasy stuff in general is.
Oh yeah, and we were talking about that. I'd love to get you guys' take on this. In one of our streams, we were talking about with the advent of Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, making all this money. But it's rare you see epic fantasy comics do as well. And we were talking about why is that? And everybody had a theory. But
I would say it's the art style. For me, I would say, if you had, a really good like painter style artist, like that. Because everybody tries to do it very comic booky. Yeah. And it just doesn't work that great. Actually, there's one, although it's pretty dark, but there's one that's done really well, at least financially and with the fans and everything, called Die. And it's a D&D type thing. And then this one of the characters he gets their crew back together, and unbeknownst to them, like it's almost like the D&D cartoon thing where he kind of takes them into this other world, but it's very dark, and because he's gotten into like real dark magic and stuff, and he's basically kind of trying to take them out and different things, and so do these other things, and that are like really pretty wild. Like I think he even has I'm trying to remember exactly because I've only read a couple of them, but I think he even has like dice where his eyes were. And stuff. It's like really, there's some like really, it's right. But it's cool because it gives you that vibe of a lot of the high fantasy where it's like it's really good against evil. Sure. There's definitely some gray in there, but it's like it's very clear that like most of the evil stuff is very gross and clearly evil, and they've really got this big uphill thing against them, especially because most of them are regular people. They're not actually the characters that they played years ago or whatever and stuff. But the art style for that it's kind of an in-between. It's kind of a hybrid where it's more of a simple painted style kind of. And as I said, that has gone over very well. A lot of the other things have not like lasted that long. That one I think has around 50 issues or something. It's actually sold really, really well. And it has some really good not that you have to talk about this, but it has some really good graphic design elements and stuff to it too. Because it actually, like the sides on like a 20-sided die, how it's all the different interconnected triangles. They do that with the covers for it. So there's like spaces out of where the triangles are, and they put the things in there. So it's very heavily thematic and everything. And
is it die cut?
I would not be surprised if they did not have some sort of die cut version. But there definitely needs to be. There needs to be.
CrossGen did a title, Sojourn.
Yeah, it did really well.
Pretty decent, right?
Yeah.
That had a real Lord of the Rings look because it followed the film. It came out right after Jackson's trilogy movies were done. So, but yeah, the epic fantasy material is really fun to draw, and it does. I still draw in my style, but he obviously the creator wanted that. He's like, no, we want you to draw like you draw,
right?
Even though you're drawing, sword and sorcery stuff, which brings me to like a lot of inspiration from Conan, because Conan's lasted a long time, and you could argue that's a type of epic fantasy. It's not, elves and orcs, but then again, it's got swords and sandals, man.
Yeah.
And again, though, that is a different kind of thing. Somebody mentioned that Sandman was fantasy, and it's done well. I was like, well, yeah, kind of. Not really the epic quest fantasy that I'm thinking of in my head, but you could argue that. I think Barb brought up Elf Quest.
Yeah.
Another one, right? So there've been some attempts out there. The other one that you don't see doing really well is like Halo or Call of Duty, right? You've got these video games going gangbusters with making tons of money, but where are the military, comic books? And I looked it up actually, and Activision actually put out Call of Duty comic, pretty high quality. But I think a lot of that has to do with the gaming experience is so real now that it's almost like, why do the comic when you can do the game? But then again, Mike can speak to this better than I can. The fact that, the Punisher was so successful for so long as well. It's interesting. Are they still, they're still doing the Punisher now. I know he's appearing in other books.
It has become an embarrassment to Marvel, and they've turned him into a ninja. They've taken away the skull. The creator of the Punisher has declared he's ashamed that military and police use the symbol. And it seems like they're getting ready to finish him off.
I think, one of the mainstream titles that I do follow because I like the art is Daredevil. And in the current Daredevil, they've made the Punisher the head of the hand. And Daredevil and Elektra are the head of the fist. And though they're going up against each other, I'm wondering if they're setting him up to be whacked in this particular story. I don't know. But
I have to confess, I haven't read a Punisher comic in years. The only news I get from them is on the Facebook Punisher forums, which follow the character religiously.
Right. I mean, John Wick, if the Punisher's so bad, then why is John Wick okay, right? But I guess Marvel wouldn't publish
because he fights fantasy villains.
Well, he also they killed his dog. So
true. I explained that to my wife. I'm like, you got to watch this with me. And she's like, what? Shoot him up. I said, I know you like spy movies. This is a little more of a shoot 'em up, but you'll like this. Once we got past the dog scene, she was right there with him, man. She was like, take him out. But the emotional engine of that just really carries you through.
Oh yeah, and I like the and I've told a lot of people too. It has some of the better world building in in an action movie. I mean, with the whole hotel thing and everything. I'm actually interested to because they're still talking about doing the TV show or whatever. Around the hotel and everything, and I'm pretty interested to. I think that's there's a lot of neat stuff you could do with that.
They lost me with the last one.
The last one was a little
high table.
Yeah.
Dean, tell us about Cat and Mouse.
Cat and Mouse. We got started with that in 2016, and we wanted to bring it up to date. Roland's original idea was that these teenagers. One had run away from home, and he was kind of a sort of a goth girl, rejecting parental authority and stuff. She runs off to New Orleans, and her sister's ex-boyfriend decides to go chase her down, and he's had some training in law enforcement. He goes down there to find her, and they end up uncovering a human trafficking group down there, led by this female villain. And I suggested to Roland, I said, let's make this even a little bit cooler. Since we're in New Orleans, let's bring some voodoo and some dark magic into it. So I kind of took a page out of Live and Let Die, and I styled a lot of the villainess's trappings along the lines of Solitaire and Live and Let Die, and also put a few of the voodoo images from that film around the atmosphere. And we kind of tried to turn into a little bit of a scary thing, but it was fun because it basically ends up being, you know, Teen Titans fighting a voodoo cult that kidnaps kids and rescuing them. It got to be a lot of fun. So I did the first one and got into the second one. And then I had to move on to other things. As Mike knows, when you get to be our age, parents start to get ill and they need more care. And so that happened. And I'm being the only kid, I had that on my shoulder. So I had to take a break from comics for a while, take care of family business. Once that was done, I got back into it again. But this time I talked to Roland about Silverblade. And that's currently the book I'm in development in now. And what I wanted to do originally was I wanted to do my take on Dracula from Van Helsing's point of view. And I created this Order of Knights, the Order of Sacred Silver, that existed as a spinoff from the Templars. And they know the secret of why silver defeats evil. I wanted to tell that story. So it grew from that basic concept to its own thing where I put Dracula out of it. Van Helsing's still in it, but it's more about the Order fighting a cult of the Golden Calf, which I call the Golden Legion. And so you got silver versus gold, right, in essence. And you've got this Order of Knights in Victorian London. This American cavalry officer who had his wife killed and his daughter kidnapped goes over to England because of some leads he finds, and ends up using his skills as a swordsman to do a demonstration of fencing with the English champion. He beats the English champion, and one of the Knights of the Order is there watching him and contacts him after and says, "Hey, look, you've got a skill set we need. We're getting pretty old to keep doing this stuff. We always need new recruits." Asks him to join. He says, "Nah, you know, your little club with your knights or whatever. I'm not into that." And he's a man of the world. He has no faith. He's just, you know, he's broken. Through the experience of the storyline, however, he does become involved with the Knights eventually, and he does get his faith renewed. And we go along the adventure with him, and we uncover sort of a Hellfire Club type of cult in underground London, and it's set in 1892. So if you've ever played anything like Assassin's Creed Syndicate, are you aware of that environment? That's kind of the idea there. So I wanted to blend. So you have some characters from literature that you're going to recognize, like Alan Quatermain. My leading character was trained by Zorro, who in my storyline is also a member of the Order of Sacred Silver, right? So it's kind of this brotherhood of good guys that's been behind the scenes for years, and that's kind of the setup for it. So I'm going to be working on that throughout 2023 and try to get that launched. And then whatever comes next, I know Mike and I were. Did you ever hear back from that gentleman who had talked to you about possibly doing a storyline about, it took place on the border. It was similar to your Private American book. I wondered if that ever manifested.
You mean Nick Searcy?
Yes.
Well, we're talking, and Nick is a great guy. He's been very helpful to me. You know, he's a well-known actor.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But right now, he gave us permission to use his likeness in a graphic novel. We're adapting John Ringo's zombie apocalypse novels into graphic novels, and Nick's going to be a bad guy. But I would love to hear his idea for a border story. In fact, I'm going to ask him to send it to me.
Good. Because as I said, that would be something fun and exciting to do too.
Would you be interested in illustrating that?
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely.
Well, I'll keep that in mind.
Please. Yes, please do. I like stories where you have a clear definition of good and evil.
Absolutely, me too.
I like where the
I
bad
talk about
guys
that all the time.
are bad and the good guys are good, and it doesn't have to be in a cheesy way or
No, it doesn't. No,
childlike.
it all depends. It's not what you say; it's the way that you say it.
The way that you
Yeah.
say it. Yes.
You know,
In fact,
John Gardner wrote a book called On Moral.
He cut himself.
he's cycling. I think
Is probably lots of noise with the dogs or
got it.
wife or
That's okay.
Garage door opener.
the
But in On Moral Fiction, Gardner argues that the audience wants to see good rewarded and evil punished, or they will feel cheated. And I
Correct.
agree with that for the most part. We want our stories to have a moral epiphany, and that doesn't mean that the hero always prevails. Just look at the end of Spartacus, where he's hanging on the cross.
Yeah.
The grace
Yeah.
note is when his wife rides by in the cart and holds his child up, says, "See, you live on."
Yes. Yes.
yeah.
Excellent. I've always thought that. In fact, I illustrated a book cover last year for a novel called Quo Vadis, and if you've ever read that, Mike, it's fantastic. Some say that the movie Gladiator is loosely adapted from Quo Vadis, and there are so many elements that are similar.
Has that book been published?
Yes, it has.
Do you have copies?
I have copies. Would you like
Let's trade books.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
It's an excellent novel set in that time period of ancient Rome during the reign of Emperor Nero. And it holds back nothing when it comes to what was done to Christians at that time for the entertainment of people in the arena. And it's horrifying. And the storyline is excellent. I don't want to give any of it away, but it's an excellent novel. But that being said, I really think that part of the reason these films do well and are enduring, movies like Gladiator, even like Braveheart, is because they tell stories of men with conviction and with a value system that they refuse to compromise, and they pay the price for it. And yet, as Mike stated earlier, evil is punished and good is rewarded. And that resonates beyond America. It resonates worldwide. It resonates on a human level. And those stories, to me, have a better chance of becoming what we would call modern mythology. And in fact, to me, that is elevated to the level of literature. I know that according to academia, one has to produce something of political significance in order for it to be considered literature these days. But to me, it has to have a more epic scope, a more universal conflict. And if it's written and illustrated well, or the story is told on a level of excellence, then it will endure.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, I think that's the goal for a lot of creators, even though they don't know it. So especially when they're younger, they don't necessarily know it. But I think when you get older, you're like, okay, these certain movies or these certain books or whatever, like they really had a heavy influence on me. Like they made me rethink something or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I mean, you can literally change people's lives or inspire them in other ways by those stories.
Absolutely. And they don't have to be particularly preachy either.
Right.
There are folks who may not know that the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis is a Christian metaphor. I mean,
right.
For those of us raised in that faith, it's obvious, it's right there.
Right.
But, for some people, that they're getting the message through fantasy, through epic fantasy, and yet it's still a wonderfully entertaining tale. The first book, especially, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Excellent book for kids, but for everyone, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually like which is, I don't know, it's a weird thing for me. I like it when it's the reverse. I like Magician's Nephew when like the witch and things come to our world.
Yeah.
And I love stories like that where the crazy thing, or like, you know, like Ham the Wizard comes to our world. And
right. No, I appreciate that. I've talked to people who are on both sides of that, the production
yeah,
order and the chronological order people, and
yeah,
yeah, I respect both of those positions. I'm more the production order person,
right,
the reason it
yeah,
was written first, and
yeah,
I like the metaphor there, and I think that as a creator who has a strong faith, I feel I'm called to share redemption stories, and some of them can be obvious and some of them can be metaphorical, but that's the story I'm compelled to tell. That's what I'm here to do.
yeah.
So you'll see that theme in a lot of the stories that I write and have creative input in, for sure.
But that's the basic theme of most of the stories we like.
Yeah. Yeah. Even I was gonna say, even like the original like Star Wars trilogy and stuff, that even George Lucas has gone back and tried to kind of undo some of the stuff because he doesn't like the way it comes across
He
now.
could
But
make it all go away by producing an outstanding new movie. That's all it takes is an outstanding new movie.
yeah,
But they can't, you know,
retroactively.
No,
and we've been watching these movies. I mean, we've all seen some of the subsequent Star Wars movies, and some of them are entertaining, but they just don't have the impact. They just don't.
they don't. 4, 5, and 6, as I call it, or I even like better calling just Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi. Right. That's
Yeah,
all.
yeah,
I mean, those are the other movies are fun, and I kind of like some of the themes, but overall, the impact of the original trilogy still reigns supreme in my mind. And the lessons, people still connect with Empire because of the introduction of Yoda and the lessons of basically growing up and learning to go from childhood to manhood and what that means and what you're responsible for, and Luke refusing to use anger to take down his father, right?
yeah, yeah.
That is an old Japanese samurai legend where the
Right.
samurai is chasing someone down, a criminal, and it's taken him for almost years, and it finally gets him cornered, and the criminal in his anger spits on the samurai, and the samurai gets so mad and he reaches to draw his sword and he doesn't draw it, and he waits for another time
Yeah,
because he doesn't want to take him out in anger, right? The anger would be taking him down, not justice, right? So those old lessons and old myths are all there to teach us something about vengeance versus justice, and these higher callings, these higher virtues. Virtue is everything. I mean, isn't it Socrates that said that life should be the cultivation of virtue, basically, to live a good life? Why aren't they teaching that in school? Are
You
they
know
too busy
why?
teaching other things? We could go there. We could do a whole show on that. But I'll leave it there since we're at an hour. So
yeah, yeah. Oh, I had something to add to that I
you
can't.
got to.
Okay. No, I was just gonna say, because of what you brought up earlier with like the self-restraint, I think self-control and self-restraint, we need some kind of fantastic story about that, or some kind of concept that really can kind of drive that home, because I mean, just
Right.
like that is just not in our society
Well, they used to call it
at all.
temperance. It was called
Yeah.
temperance.
Well, I think it's all over classic literature
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's
and
just, I
even
mean,
modern literature to a certain extent. There are people that repeat those lessons,
right.
those life lessons.
And
Yeah.
people use the wrong word all the time. Trope. Now that's like the new
Yeah.
fashionable word.
Yeah.
They think it means cliche. It's not that. They use it interchangeably. It doesn't mean that. But
Yeah.
What we need to do is return, if you want to tell epic, enduring stories, in my opinion, is return to telling stories about these virtues, the 7 virtues. And because those are the struggles of all of us. That's a common struggle of being human. Subduing your wrath, subduing your desire. The icon of St. George and the dragon, if you look at it carefully, St. George isn't slaying the dragon. St. George is subduing the dragon. And many scholars say that is an example of the idea that we can't completely defeat our dark side, but the struggle of life is to subdue it. It makes us who we are. There was a Star Trek, the original series episode called The Enemy Within that addressed that, for those of you who remember the original series. I mean, Kirk could only be Kirk if he had the dark side within him, but it needed to be managed. And the balance of that was what makes us a complete human being. You can't completely purge the darkness, but you can subdue it. So yeah, I would agree with you. Stories like that would be quite helpful for our culture.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I'm saying. I'm saying more like in a pop culture, comic books, movie, TV show, like whatever. But you could even set it as like a sci-fi thing. Like actually, one of the things, and I'm not trying to drag on Mike, I promise. There's Mike's going to sleep.
There he's nodding off.
One of the things that I loved about the show Pushing Daisies is that the two people that are in love can never touch, because if he touches, he can touch people once and bring them back to life. If he touches something again, it's dead again. And so he brings back his girlfriend that was murdered, that he's in love with, but he can never touch her again, but he's always close to her. And like that's one of the better self-restraint things, because it's like I can always be with her, but I can never touch her. And it's like, and it's just the real love that like of their relationship that comes across from that is like, I mean, so many people, especially females, but a lot of people in general, like that is one of the most romantic shows, because it's just, they really have to just love each other and never touch, or else she's dead.
Yeah.
But and there's some interesting twists or whatever you could do with something like that would kind of give a restraint message. But yeah. It's
a good one. Mike is thinking of taking your man card away for bringing.
Yeah, I know. I don't care.
If it's good, it's good, right?
That's okay. Yeah. I took his permission to get in Florida away, so it's fine.
You would be a perfect fit for Florida, dude. I mean,
that's actually really true.
I mean, right? I mean, why isn't Mike in Florida or Texas?
I've been there many times, but Jeff's going to be in the next book.
Oh boy!
See, excellent. That's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, I keep teasing him, but and actually, it does, surprisingly, it sells very well in Florida. His silly Florida Man book, but
well, of course it does. It's fun,
but it is very funny, and it is.
I'll send you those, Dean.
Thank you.
Yeah,
please do. I write myself a note to send you Quo Vadis. You'll love it.
Where will you send it?
I'll send it to.
That's just a play on words.
See, his cleverness knows no bounds.
I know.
It knows bounds. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, you guys. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. Okay, bye.